The number of people with diabetes is growing. Last year, there were an estimated 415 million diabetics globally. In 2014, that's expected to be 642 million. I talked about that with Dr. Daniel Moore, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics at Vanderbilt University.
Certainly that is a frightening statistic for us to confront. Undoubtedly, the global increase in obesity is playing an important role in driving that, but there are also certainly unidentified environmental factors that are contributing, and there are many studies going on to try to identify those. There's a little bit of a silver lining there as well, in that persons diagnosed with type 1 and type 2 diabetes today are likely to still be alive for that census in 2040, which is an achievement over the past. And also the aging population worldwide, as people get older, they're at a little bit of an increased risk, but it's also an achievement for people to be living that long.
Well, for those who aren't aware, what are the major differences between the two types of diabetes that you mentioned, type 1 and type 2?
Well, type 1 and type 2 diabetes have a lot in common as we learn more and more about them, but there are some important differences. Type 1 diabetes is most commonly diagnosed in younger individuals, although there are people over the age of 70 being diagnosed with type 1. Type 2 diabetes is most commonly diagnosed in older individuals, though we are seeing a frightening increase in children and teenagers diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. They occur for different reasons. Type 1 diabetes occurs because the islet cells that make insulin have been lost, whereas type 2 diabetes usually occurs due to resistance to the action and capacity to produce enough insulin. And also the treatments are a little bit different. Almost all people with type 1 diabetes are going to be taking insulin injections, whereas many people with type 2 diabetes start on oral therapies. However, there's also some sharing there as well, where people with type 1 diabetes, as they age, may benefit from type 2 therapies, and people with type 2 diabetes sometimes progress to needing insulin.
Dr. Moore, China is not a country that many people would associate with diabetes, yet it has 109 million diabetics, the highest of any country on earth. So what causes diabetes, and what could be the major issue there in China?
Yeah, that's sort of a great question. And implicit in that question is that we don't really know who has diabetes just by looking at them. Diabetes can occur in all people, and all races are at risk. So as we look at the increases there and the causes, type 1 diabetes is caused by an immune attack on the pancreas, where your immune cells make a mistake and destroy the cells that make insulin. Type 2 diabetes is caused by a number of genes that act in the islet beta cells that make insulin, and it collaborates in such a way that the beta cells can't make enough insulin to meet your demands. And so the more stresses that the body faces, requiring it to make more and more insulin to meet its metabolic demands, for persons at risk for type 2 diabetes, they can't keep up with that. And when they don't make enough insulin, their glucoses start to rise. Why this is particularly affecting countries like China or even our own, we don't know, but as obesity increases, that certainly puts us at more and more risk.
3 out of every 100 people who die in the United States this year will die because of diabetes. So how have the treatment options advanced, and what's the prognosis for someone with diabetes?
Yeah, that's certainly a sobering statistic. I was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 1976, so I've lived with it for more than 40 years, and I can say firsthand that the treatments for type 1 diabetes and insulin therapies have progressed decade by decade to make it a more accessible disease to treat. And so there's ever better insulins, ever better management technologies, ever better ways to manage and monitor your treatment plan for type 1 diabetes. At the same time, for type 2 diabetes, we're understanding better the whole network of hormones that regulate appetite and that regulate our digestion of our food and the conversion of that food to sugar. So there's a whole network of these things that are becoming the targets of new pharmacologic therapies. At the end of the day, it comes down to the individual and their treatment team. An individual with good motivation, a good treatment team, and good backers can have a very excellent prognosis with diabetes. Certainly that's something we've learned from very large-scale diabetes trials, some of which were conducted here at Vanderbilt, where we know that controlling diabetes limits diabetes complications and leads to a very long and productive life with diabetes.
All right, Dr. Daniel Moore, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your insight.
Thank you for having me.